川普关税政策的不确定性，让投资人面对未明朗的前景时陷入恐慌，甚至在金融市场还出现了罕见的股债汇三杀局面。不论是否真如川普所言，关税是良药，苦涩的阵痛期已经先到来。而这个时候，资金的灵活性与长期策略的拟定就更加重要。面对股灾，该抱持着怎么样的心态？请看今天的关键对话。
关键时刻掌握关键对话。大家好，我是思翰。今年的4月上旬全球的金融市场可以说是经过了一阵滔天巨浪。光在美国呢，就出现了这种史诗级的暴跌，然后又暴涨。而在台湾应该很多的投资人都没有想过，这一辈子竟然可以看到短短1个礼拜的时间，就经过2次开盘及收盘，台指期呢直接开盘的时候跌停锁死，或者是涨停锁死，一价到底这样的一个状况啊。很多投资人不管是短线、中线、长线，可能或多或少都受了一点伤，又或者是呢这个投资的步调阵脚有一点点乱了。所以说，在2025年到底要重新回到正确的方向，有哪一些策略？我们今天很荣幸的为您邀请到了富兰克林坦博顿稳定月收益基金的经理人 Todd Brighton。这档基金呢，其实是富兰克林坦博顿旗下台湾投资人持有的规模最大的一档有达到大约910亿元台币以上就请他来为大家指点迷津了。Hello, Todd. Nice to meet you. Would you like to say hello to our audience and introduce yourself?
Hello, audience. I'm Todd Brighton, a portfolio manager with the Franklin Income Fund from San Francisco, California.
Okay, so first of all, I was talking about the dramatic change during the past few weeks. And I think one reason is due to Trump's tariff policy keep changing. So how do you think about that? Do you think the investor may be a little bit overreacted?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's certainly been a very volatile market over the last couple of weeks. And whether it's uncertainty, I mean, the fact is, markets were priced, at a fairly high level coming into this year, particularly on the equity side and particularly on some of the largest mega cap tech companies. So there wasn't a lot of room for uncertainty or negativity, and certainly what we've got over the last couple of weeks, and it's what investors are really frightened of, is not knowing what's coming next. So there's just going to be a lot of this uncertainty and a lot of this back and forth over the next couple of weeks, and investors are going to have to navigate.
You mentioned about uncertainty. People don't like uncertainty. So do you believe that the U.S. economy will go through maybe a painful adjustment, like before they experiencing the benefit of making America great again?
I would say we're going through it right now. For the economy, the challenge is it's hard for them to readjust because they don't know what the rules are right now. At the beginning of the equity sell-off, we did see the bond market rally pretty significantly at the front end of last week. And it was really on Wednesday that you saw the change and you saw the bond market start to sell off pretty dramatically. Not surprisingly, that's also when the administration started to back off some of the most draconian measures that were in their tariff announcements. That really shows kind of the power of the bond market. So, I think that the Fed will still support the economy via rate cuts should we get weakness in the economy. So we think over the longer term that negative correlation between bonds, where bonds go up when stocks go down, will still come out more in the longer term. But still, as we're dealing with this uncertainty, we could see markets where they'll move in the same direction.
So will all the situation become like a better maybe in the H2 this year later, or maybe if we have to wait everything stable, maybe it's like a next year?
We had a fairly strong economy, fairly good backdrop within the U.S. So growth in the 2 to 3% range, the unemployment rate around 4.1. That's up from the lows, but still a pretty low number historically. So well-balanced job market. We had disinflation, inflation coming back down to the Fed's 2% target. So the economy was in a pretty good spot. So that was the backdrop. Then we get the volatility that we saw last week in markets. These are very rare events, something we've seen 3 times in the last 15 years. Currently, the pandemic, and then as well the global financial crisis. So we see this event as very different. This is not the financial crisis where we had questions about, are financial institutions going to be able to survive? Is the plumbing of financial markets broken? In the pandemic, we were talking about the global economy completely shutting down and people staying in their homes. The backdrop that I just laid through of what the U.S. economy looks like is very different than some of those periods. So we do think that, to the question you asked at the beginning, is a bit of an overreaction. There is a lot of uncertainty, but these tend to be periods where it pays for investors to be looking for opportunities, to be putting money to work in markets.
So there's still many sectors or variables to monitor.
Correct.
But Franklin income strategy is quite well known as for its a flexibility and also the focus on income generation. So could you simply share your portfolio now?
We think the portfolio is pretty well placed. We have been as much as 75% equity, as much as 75% fixed income over the last couple of years. Our benchmark is 50-50, and that's more where we are today, more of a neutral positioning between fixed income and equities, which we think has served investors well going into this period. The portfolio is down around 4% year to date. While not great, the S&P is down well over 7%. So it's a significant outperformance versus some of our peers in the broader equity market. We think, if we're moving into a period of high volatility, potentially lower returns, we're probably not talking about the 25%, 23% equity returns that investors in the U.S. have gotten in the last couple of years. So in a much lower return environment, having that stable income, that stable return coming to investors, not relying completely on capital gains, I think is a nice place for investors to be looking today.
So for the investors who wants to find a new opportunity this year, which regions or maybe asset classes or industry do you see have the best potential this year or maybe next year?
Yeah, we're primarily a U.S. fund, so most of our regional exposure is within the U.S., which we think is still well placed. If we look at the companies within the United States, still phenomenal profit margins at or near record highs. We're starting to see earnings reports roll through this week. That the earnings season started last week, so we'll start to see a continuation that the first of the banks that have reported have had pretty strong earnings results. Investors are more focused now on what is the forward outlook.
And also how to think about AI industry, because some people think the bubble is a little bit too big.
Yeah. We saw this with the internet in 2000, right? The internet has turned out to be a phenomenal tool for everyone, but a lot of those companies didn't make it, right? Just because the valuations were so high, and those companies have still never recovered to those levels. So you have to kind of break out the thematic and the trend from actual companies' business models. So we do think as a lot of these valuations have reset, there are still some of those great companies that are well positioned within AI, and that's not only within chips and within technology, but also within power. How are you going to power the data center? The actual servers that are going into them. There's a lot of different parts of this that may be, less recognized than some of the main names that we think of as the main AI winners so far.
Okay, so finally, given all the uncertainty we just mentioned, do you have any advice for the Taiwanese audience for this year and maybe next year?
Know your plan. What is your long-term plan? There is a lot of noise right now. The signal is hard to find in all the noise. What we think about what's happening in the administration today might not be what we're looking at even in 18 months when we go through midterm elections in the U.S. The situation might change significantly. So we try to talk to our investors, to remain calm, to kind of, focus on the goal and focus on the long term. And we think that's what serves the investors the best.
Thank you, Todd. That is really impressive, and thanks for your time. 在这个瞬息万变的市场之中哦，确实需要冷静的来面对，但也是这样子的一个震荡剧烈的状况，创造了一个财富重新分配的契机，走在正确的道路上，而且呢，使用正确的投资策略，就可以为您带来稳定的收益以及可观的获利。以上就是今天的关键对话，我是思翰，我们下次见。